Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Independent Speculator Interviews, or In the Pit with Lobo Tigre, as I like to call them. Today we're talking with Chris Taylor. He's the president and CEO of Great Gear Resources. This is a company that's come up on a lot of people's radar lately. They've had a discovery in the prolific Red Lake district of Ontario. So this is elephant country, it's high grade, it's exciting, but it's still early days here, so we want to ask the hard questions and talk to Chris. But why don't we go ahead and let Chris tell his story first, and then we'll get into questions. So tell us about your company, Chris.
Thanks very much for speaking with me, by the way. I much appreciate it. It's great to get the word out about what we've been doing recently. Great Bear, it's a Canadian gold-focused exploration company. We have a project which we call the Dixie Project, which is located in the Red Lake District, as you mentioned. The project itself is about a 15-minute drive from downtown along the main highway. So there's great access to the project. There's a power line. The main power line that supplies power to town runs over the project. These are all great infrastructure points. It's one of the reasons that we were interested in the first place. And the property, Dixie, is 100% owned by our company, and there's no royalties to be paid on it. So all the benefit of what we're doing here should flow to our shareholders as well.
Okay, very good. And I've been there, and obviously, aside from being elephant country, it's well-developed country, major world-class gold mines there, so lots of infrastructure. Absolutely get that.
Yeah.
So to be very frank, the reason why we're having this conversation is you've made a discovery, you put out some very high-grade drill results, got my attention, but the stock went way up, and then it's continued to go up. You're up 5% today, last I saw, just because you announced your next drill target. That's not an addition of value. That's a plan that hopefully will result in value. So what I'm trying to get a grasp of is, what you really have now, what the size potential is, and where we go from here. How do we, backfill that value and add more value going forward? So why don't you tell us about, the discovery in hand, what its dimensions are, and what you hope to, achieve with your next round of drilling.
Sure. I'll try to address. That's kind of a few questions nested together.
We
Which
can take
I'll
them one
get
at a
through.
time.
Yeah, no problem. But it's really kind of three back-to-back discoveries that we've made on the project. And this is a question I get a lot. And okay, well, your recent discovery, and I have to say which one. Was it the first result about a year ago of 10 meters of 16 grams, which was in the main Dixie Limb, which is a very large target with maybe 10 kilometers of strike potential and a number of high-grade zones in it that we've drilled to date? Was it the Hinge Zone discovery, which was about 16 meters of, say, 26 grams? Or was it the South Limb discovery, which is another zone where we had about a couple meters of about 100 grams at about a 75-meter depth? These are all shallow, near-surface, high-grade gold discoveries off the highway outside of Red Lake, and that's really, I'm happy to talk about any of them. The main zone, when we got involved in the project, was referred to as the Dixie Limb Zone. Teck, when they did the discovery work back in the 1980s, called it the 88-4 Zone. There was Teck Resources that worked on it. Mark O'Day's group, Frontier Gold, worked on it before they were taken over by Newmont, right, about 10 years ago. And then there was a little company called Grandview Gold that worked on it as well. So there was about 160 holes into that zone when we got involved in the project. And one of the interesting holes was 12 meters of about 7.5 grams drilled by Teck back in the day, so 35 years ago. So that was it has big potential. What we've seen with the work that we've been doing on it is it probably has the best continuity of gold mineralization of any deposit that I've seen in the Red Lake District. So there's over 100 holes into that contact. It's really a geologic contact that's mineralized with gold. And we've got about 100 holes over about 2.3 kilometers. Every hole hits gold. Now, not every hole is what I would call an economic type intercept, because the weakest holes are about a meter of 1.5 grams or something like that. But the strongest holes that you're seeing are, say, like the 10 meters of 16 grams, which would be cored by, say, a meter of 100 grams. These are very good. These are very good intercepts, and they all go right to surface. So that includes some shallow drilling that we did into it, which was about, if I recall correctly, it was about 40 meters of couple of grams or just under a couple of grams at about 20 or 30 meters vertical depth. So those kind of zones will go right up to surface, and that makes it a very interesting target. Subsequent to that, we discovered something called the hinge zone, where we predicted that the system would fold back on itself. So the main contact we're drilling, it extends for about 10 kilometers on our project. I tend to gesture with my hands when I'm speaking, and I'm trying to keep my hands.
That's what geologists do.
Oh my God, we can't communicate without some sort of visual reference, right? So you'll see me jerking around with my head. That's me holding my hands under my lap so I don't start.
It's okay, relax. It's all good. The last fellow we had on held up a piece of paper and folded it to show the nature of his deposit. So knock yourself out.
Nice. So what we figured out was we did a high-resolution geophysical survey in 2017, and that showed us that the area that we were drilling, which was this Dixie limb zone, as we call it, or the 88-4 zone that Tech called it, it looked like it was part of a contact that extended for about 10 kilometers along the property. And then we expanded the property to control the on-strike potential of that target. And then we drilled it along strike, and we were getting good mineralization. Like we have a couple meters of 12 grams, I believe it was, which was on about a 1.6 kilometer step out right near surface. 40 meters vertical depth. I can't remember the exact depth, but it was basically a very shallow hit along that contact on a very big step out. And what we realized was that when that contact folds back around on itself, it had the potential to have increased grades and thicknesses related to that folding. So that's what we called the hinge zone. When we drilled that, initially there was a few holes into the area, probably, I'm just guessing here because I'd have to open up my data and look at it, but there was 5 or 6 holes that were into it already. They ended up being a meter to a couple of meters of half an ounce to a couple ounce material. And what was interesting is that we have these geologists that work for the company. They all used to work for Goldcorp, which is the main producer in the region. Sure. So the main Red Lake gold mine, I'm not sure what its total ounce production level is right now, but I know they had a global resource of something like about 40 million ounces, of which they're still producing from today. Right. And they're producing down at over 2 kilometers vertical depth, right? It's a very big gold system. But one of the main features that these geologists had seen when they looked at that drill core was there was this red-brown hydrothermal biotite alteration around very high-grade quartz veins at about, a couple kilometers vertical depth. They began seeing those same features in our drill core when we were drilling this at about 100 meters vertical depth, so a fraction of that depth. And they told us at the time, and Bob Singh, our VP Exploration, who has also worked in Red Lake for about 18 years now, I believe, Bob was saying he'd seen this when he did a tour of the underground workings at the main Red Lake gold mine in what they call the high-grade zone, which was, again, found under Rob McEwen's supervision, if you'll remember that whole story, the Rob McEwen Gold Corp Challenge. So the high-grade zone was found. It has a marker of this red-brown hydrothermal biotite alteration adjacent to high-grade quartz veins with high-grade gold in them, right? So we saw the same thing. We did some follow-up holes. Every drill hole we do, this would not be widely appreciated by the market, is an oriented drill core. It's oriented core. So when we come up with structural fabric information from that core, we're able to predict where we have a local fold hinge or other features like that. So what we did was we looked at drill holes that were in the hinge zone area, and we figured out where there would be folding that would potentially concentrate the grade. We put some holes into that. Our initial hole was, say, 16 meters of 26 grams. There was a follow-up hole that we did slightly deeper, which was about 7 meters of 68 grams. So that was using structural data and a predictive model of where folding would occur to be able to hit sort of an enhanced grade and thickness part of our main contact. We followed up with that immediately. There was part of a drill program that we laid out, a 10,000 meter program earlier this year. So we drilled the Dixie limb. We drilled step outs on the Dixie limb, 1.6 kilometers along the Dixie limb to bring the strike length up to about 2.3 kilometers. We drilled that particular hinge. There's other hinges on the project, which we're going to be looking at here in the near future. And then we drilled something we call the south limb zone, which is where that whole system folds back on itself on the other side. And there we hit The interval I would use to describe it would be about 2 meters of about 100 grams, but it's part of a big vein system. And if you look at the complete vein, the vein is mineralized from end to end, but it's higher grade on each side. But if you took a composite interval, it would be about 10 meters of 18 grams over the course of that vein. So that is basically an entirely new context of high-grade gold mineralization, because those veins line up along the axis of a big regional D2 fold. These are the folds that are important in Red Lake because they control high-grade gold at many of the other deposits. So I realize I'm veering off very kind of technically.
That's okay.
But I quite enjoy talking about it. And really, the axis of that fold will span several kilometers on our project. So that South Limb discovery that we made recently, it looks the most like many of the other deposits that are not specifically the high-grade zone of the Red Lake mine, but it looks like other portions of the Red Lake gold mine operated by Goldcorp. It looks like other things that are drilled with other mines that are in the area. So it's an exciting new target. And I remember when we put out the discovery, the market did not appreciate that it was an entirely new zone with a new control context on it.
Yeah, I didn't at first. I didn't until I went and looked at your presentation. I said, oh, this is not the hinge zone. I need to better understand what's going on here. So there's a lot in what you said, and I want to follow up on a couple things, but sort of putting the big picture together.
Yeah.
So it's about this contact. And yes, in a fold zone, you may have dilation. You may have more room for the juice there to mineralize the rocks, and that could be a sweet spot. But that's not what it's all about. That's just an area of this overall contact which goes around the fold and continues. And that's where the potential size comes in. Is that fair to say?
That is a very astute observation. You know, I was asked, and it's a very well-known broker here in Vancouver that I sat down with the other day, and he said, Chris, tell me about the market cap that you're dealing with on the company right now. Where does it come from? This is a good question, right? And I told him frankly, I said, the market does not yet appreciate the scope and the controls on the system. Our market cap is coming from 2 holes out of a network now of about 210 drill holes that are completed on the project, and the market does not understand the significance of the other zones that we've been drilling and have now discovered. So
that's true. And well, but to be fair, you know, I looked through the presentation. I couldn't find any sections. I was having a hard time putting together, okay, you know, I saw South Limb, okay, this is different, but how does it fit? You know, how does this story connect to the other part? And what you've just told me has explained a lot that it was not clear to me before. So, and I know that this is new, and it's going to take a while for you guys to draw cartoons and get it out there. But, you know, it's all a work in progress. So one of the things I noticed was on that, and I give you kudos for this, is when you put out those 2 holes on the hinge zone, there were other drill traces on there. They didn't have anything. And I thought that was pretty honest, right? Instead of just saying, oh, here's our 2 hits, and, you know, you showed that there was other work in the area. But so I give you kudos for being honest in doing that, but it also made me wonder, okay, but if those others were blanks or off section, you know, what does this tell us about the size? So that gets us to, you know, these fold zones are famous in Red Lake, but that's just maybe, you know, potential sweet spot. But it's the bigger picture of the contact that we're after, and that's what you're drilling now, right? You just raised $10 million, and you're going to go after the whole enchilada, or we focus on the hinge zone, or what do you do with that $10 million?
The hinge zone is really, it's one of many zones where you get folding on the project and the potential for grade enrichment, right? So typically in Red Lake, and I'm gonna have to generalize here, right?
Okay.
But typically what you'd see is a zone that has sort of a cigar type geometry or a flattened cigar type geometry. Those will be controlled by the regional folding, local dilatancies. The hinge zone will be very much like that. It's going to plunge steeply down to depth. And it's going to, from what we've seen, I've seen it as narrow as a meter and as wide as 22 meters in drill core. The true thickness, and I'm just guessing on the drill core because it's a folded contact, it's very difficult to get that 22 meter interval into something that's under 10 meters or 12 meters or something. The 7 meter hole that we did, I bet you've got at least 4 meters or something of width on there from what I saw. But I'm guessing, and the reason I'm guessing is because the margins of it are folded, right? So you're looking at zones that have fold perturbation on the margins, and you're looking at something that originally would be, it would pinch and swell as it goes down to depth, and ultimately as we drill it, you'll end up with something very similar to the rest of Red Lake, is what I would guess, is that you'll be drilling and you'll have some holes that miss it, some holes that hit it, and you'll have to build out the volume of it as it goes down to depth. But really what's significant is that we have the same types of thickened high-grade features repeating themselves along that main contact, and there's a number of them. So we're seeing it in the data now with the work that we're doing, is you have and this was apparent as early as the work that Teck did 30 years ago, is that these high-grade, steeply plunging zones are present repeatedly, and they repeat themselves along strike as you move along those contacts. So there'll be a number of them that we are defining here.
Well, that leads me to another question I had looking over your data. There is a fair amount of past work on the property, but there's no resource that I saw. Is that because it was scattered over a bunch of targets? Is there no area that's been hit enough times for a resource, or are you just holding off on that, or what's going on with that?
Well, there is a resource on the project that was put together by Teck, but it would be non-compliant in current terms, and it's only based on 30 drill holes across about 300 meters. So 30 drill holes across 300 meters using a currently non-compliant resource estimate, and I couldn't even quote you the number of tons on this right now, but they did a polygonal estimate based on about 30 holes and 300 meters of strike of what they called the 88-4 zone, which is a portion of our Dixie limb.
Right.
It doesn't include the hinge. It doesn't.
No, I got that, and there'd be no point in putting that out, because then people would pigeonhole you as being much smaller than you actually are. So I understand, exactly. But I wasn't aware that that was even done. But it made me wonder, though, because we have over 100 holes here, but no resource. Yeah. So, do we have continuity, or were we just henpecking around? Or
the continuity is what got Rob McEwen involved, because we do have, and I don't know what presentation you've seen, but different vintages of presentations have long sections on them. They have cross sections on them. That information has been put out. Some of it's even in our news releases. Previous news releases. So you'll see some of them contain cross sections across like the Dixie limb. We didn't have enough information to do a definitive model when we drilled the first holes into the hinge zone. We're still working on that. We'll be drilling that again like shortly. And the same thing with the new South Limb discoveries. These are just, you put 3 holes into an area and you hit very high grade gold in one of them. It's not enough information to construct it yet, right? But we have long sections available in some of our other presentations through the Dixie limb. And you can see at the time, it was about a year ago, we did our first long section. At that time, we had about 73 holes along 500 or 600 meters of strike length of that thing. And it showed that the weakest intercepts as the drill holes hit the contact were about 3 grams per ton. The strongest intercepts were about 100 grams per ton, and there was very good continuity going from surface down to the deepest hole was about 450 meters drilled to date. And when I was looking at the data along with McEwen and his team, they were very excited because there were no holes across that 500 or 600 meters of strike length that had missed, and that's unheard of in Red Lake. Red Lake can be a pain to drill. It can be a pain to drill. You can love it or you can hate it. Whether you love it or you hate it, it doesn't impact the fact that over 30 million ounces of gold have been produced, and it's had 28 gold mines, right? So it's a very prolific district, but it tends to have issues with continuity. And I would say on average from other deposits I've looked at in the area, if you drilled 10 holes anywhere in Red Lake, even inside of a resource, right? So take a resource from any deposit you want and put 10 holes into it. 5 of them are going to be 0, right? Like not just sub-economic, they'll be 0. 5 of them will have gold in them, and probably on average 2 of them will be economic type intercepts. And when I look at our Dixie limb target at our project, if you can put 100 holes now across 2.3 kilometers of strike length and you can hit gold in every hole, that's the best continuity that anybody has generated yet in the district. And we're dealing with about 1 out of every 4 holes that we complete has over 10 grams in it as well. And when I was talking about it with the McEwen guys, that was one of the main reasons. With all their experience in Red Lake, they had not seen those kind of hit ratios before. It made them very interested to get involved. And there were some other features that if you're a geologist and you're familiar with the area, you look for that maybe the market at large just shrugs. They don't care, right? One of those is the presence of these Lamprofere dikes. And if you look at the main mine and you look at the other deposits in the area, there's these swarms of Lamprofere dikes that are associated with where you get gold mineralization. And usually the more the merrier around areas that you have high-grade gold and production. And we have a pile of Lamprofere dikes. What they indicate to you is that you have very deep-seated fractures that are bringing up primitive mantle melts up to surface. These are sort of the poor cousin of the kimberlite dike, which also come from way the heck down there. Ours are Lamproferes. They do not have diamonds in them. But you can see them where you get concentrations of them around the main structural features. You tend to get very deep-seated plumbing, and you tend to get gold mineralization. And it's together with the D2 folding that we have, and now the ultramafic geology that we have within a mafic rock package, we're really ticking a lot of boxes off in terms of comparables of what you see at other mines or other major deposits in the district.
Okay, so before we move on, of the areas that you have that are already fairly well understood, or where you've seen consistency in the drill results, can you give us an average grade and thickness? You know, if you have 50 holes in one area, do they average 2 meters of 5 grams or 1 meter of 10 grams or something like that?
It's going to average out in the areas that we're looking at. The average thickness is going to be about Red Lake average. I would say 3 meters ish. You know, so 2 to 5 meters. You know, probably averaging about 3. That's the average production width in the district, is about 3 meters. 3 meters of ore across the district, and this is ore, not mineralization, but mined ore would average about 2 to 3 meters of 10 to 15 grams. That's about what you see across the district. So we're going to have similar widths. They'll be up to quite a bit wider in some of the main areas. Where you get higher grade gold, you often get bigger widths as well, because this is a function of where fluid was penetrating the rock in larger volumes. So we would average about the same kind of mining width. We're targeting on our project very much like what other groups are doing in the area now. You're looking for that material which is going to give you a gram meter width of 20 or 30 grams. That's going to be the core behind the economics driving the project. In our case, because you have a few meters of 3 gram, 4 gram material even between the areas where you have the better grading stuff, it's very interesting. My background is in production mining with imperial metals. So one of the deposits that we put into production when I was there was the Sterling Gold Mine in Nevada. It was recently bought by Northern Empire and sold to Core Mining, right? So I was on that project for years. I used to live down in Nevada when my daughter was born. This is 10 years ago, 12 years ago. We were putting that thing into production. And the average grade underground there was about 0.15 to 0.25 ounces per ton, right? But we were mining material down to about 2.5 grams per ton when it was adjacent to those high-grade areas. So, I look at something like the Dixie Limb Zone at our project, and if the intervening material is kind of 3 or 4 gram material between your higher-grade stuff, I wonder in the future, it seems like it would be very favorable for taking a bunch of it out of the ground. But obviously, that's an extremely forward-looking statement, given the fact that we haven't even published a resource from the project yet. Sure. I just can draw on my experience to sort of give it a bit of color, right?
So speaking of forward-looking statements then, as we mentioned, you just raised $10 million. What are you going to do with that? Are you going to drill off the whole strike length as much as you can? Or are you going to focus on richer areas like presumably the hinge zone might turn out to be? Or what's the plan?
Yep. A bit of both. There's now about 100, 110 holes into the Dixie Limb Zone, which can include the hinge as part of it where it folds over itself. We need to block off the mineralization in that and see just how much of it there is in fairly tightly spaced drilling. And then we need to step out into new areas. There's so many of these D2 fold hinges that we've identified on the project. There's about half a dozen I was looking at in the data as of a couple of days ago. Some of them are associated with the rocks we already knew about. Some of them are associated with the ultramafic suite that we just found this summer. Those need to be tested. So what I think is going to happen, there'll be 150 holes, 30,000 meters of drilling, which is now underway. It'll be a mix of drilling, definition drilling on the zones like the hinge and the Dixie Limb and the South Limb that we already know about, and step out drilling to test these sort of blue sky type targets, which look very promising from the data that we've seen so far. Now, the other question, and I'll maybe beat you to it if you were going to ask, is how many drill rigs? you know. And right now we're drilling, one rig is generating about 120 meters a day of drill core, even though it's oriented drill core. It's a high rate of production.
Yeah.
So our lab is our warehouse facility, our core shack, is located directly across the street from the assay lab, SGS lab in Red Lake. So they drive a forklift over, pick up the core, and drive the forklift back over to the lab. And about 3 weeks later, we know how good was. So going forward, I could see if we brought it up to 2 rigs, we need to expand our core shack facility, and then there'd be 1 rig going and doing definition drilling on all of the targets that we know about. And there'll be 1 rig exploring all these new targets that we've identified. We need a little bit more space before we could fit all the drill core that'll generate, though. So that'll probably be the new year.
And the result of that will be a maiden resource, or if it's still wide open, do you not even bother and just keep drilling, or what happens next?
I'd have to let the results drive that, to be completely frank. Like, I'm not sure yet what the main zones on the project will be that we should be drilling off resource on. There's what we know about, and then there's all these other things that we've identified. So if it turns out that we're dealing with something, say, along that D2 fold axis, which is very much like some of the major deposits in Red Lake, you probably want to start focusing more drilling on that. But if it turns out that we just keep hitting new zones, like as we step out, if we keep hitting new zones, we will not be rushing to resource, because I will not know until there's quite a few more holes which of those zones is going to be, quote unquote, the one, right? At this point, it's very early stage.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's rewind a little bit to the drilling then, and to the consistency of the zones, and 2 related questions. Maybe it's one question, but one was, I noticed the press release where you re-assayed a certain segment, and you came out with even more wonderful numbers. So what happened there?
I mean, headache of ours. Yeah.
And that's not necessarily suspicious. You learn something, you go back. Reassaying is not unheard of. But I'm wondering specifically, what was it that was missed before, and why did you go back, and what can this tell us about other drill results from the past?
This is a great question, because it's also an amusing anecdote, and everybody gets to sit in management's shoes for a sec. So we had drilled the hinge zone mineralization back in the summer, right? We saw the core come out of the ground. It looked good. We put it into the assay lab. It started to come back. It was good. The best looking piece of core with the most gold in it came back as 1.7 grams. So the interval beside that, if memory serves, was about 100 grams, and the interval on the other side of the 1.7 was about 200 grams, right? And here we were sitting on this result that made absolutely no sense, because it was probably 2 or 3% gold by volume, that section of core that came back 1.7 grams. So we were re-assaying everything. We told the lab that we wanted it re-assayed because it didn't make sense visually. And in the middle of that process, it was going to be a few weeks until they did sort of 3 repeat gravimetric assays off of that thing and found what the problem was. We got written up, and this is the sequence of events. On a Thursday, Brian London, the newsletter writer, came out with a report saying, look at what happened to Northern Empire. Great Bear is in the same group of companies with some of the same management team. They're going to be the next takeover target. And here we were trading along quietly in the 50 to 60 cent range for most of the year prior to that point. We were waiting on these sensitive results to come back in through re-assay, because we'd identified a visual issue. And then Brian comes out with his report. Okay, fair enough. Nothing really happened. We traded up a little bit. The volume was low. We kept an eye on it. And then on the weekend, I got a call by Eric Coffin, the very well-known letter writer. Eric gives me a call, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, God, Eric, why? Why pick this particular time? So I walk Eric through all the story, just give him some of my flavor. He had done a great deal of research on his own. Eric is a very astute guy. And then he comes out with a report on Monday morning that, and it's this big write-up on Great Bear. And I thought, oh, man. So we started trading up. And then basically by, I don't know if it was that day or the end of the next day, we were trading up. We had to call IROC and halt the stock because we knew that we were sitting on news. They were wondering what the hell was going on with us. IROC is a regulator. It's a market regulator here in Canada.
You couldn't wait for the final assays is what it comes down to.
So in the end, to get news out before things could really run away,
Right.
we got out the news, and we had to issue that hole had 7 meters of 44.5 grams gold in it, which is phenomenal. And then probably 2 weeks later, in the middle of this Beaver Creek conference, we finally got enough of the reassays, triplicate gravimetric reassays of that missing interval. It came back 340 grams, not 1.7. So it was actually very inconvenient that all of that happened, the timing where it did. We did the right thing and halted, when we knew that the market was starting to run away on the recommendations. Ultimately, it has run away on us since when we're not sitting on any material news, and that's just the way it goes. We're marketing and getting the message out and talking with interviews like this. People didn't know about Great Bear until very recently,
Right.
Understandably. So, but that's the background off of that reassay work, and it was a giant headache for me.
So okay, that's an interesting story, and I was thinking that maybe there was a rock unit that had been assumed to be barren. Like if the gold is always in the quartz, and there was an interval with no quartz, and you didn't bother assaying it because there was no quartz there, but then you found, well, maybe there is something in there and went back, then that would imply something big about similar cases in other drill core where there was maybe gold that wasn't assayed before. But in this case, it looks like it was just a one-off on this particular.
Yeah. Well, there is gold outside of the quartz. It actually is in the wall rock in those areas as well, and there's a lot of it, right? So some of the 200-gram material is not in the quartz veins; it's in the wall rock around the veins. It's just heavily mineralized. The instance what you're referring to is we're finding a lot of drill core that was drilled by the historic operators on the project. There was a lot of issues with the data when we took on the property, and it's a little bit what Bob Singh, my partner, and myself have done. We worked if your contacts and your investors are aware of this. We worked on something called the Newcastle project in California, Newcastle Gold Mine.
Yeah,
Subsequent, Bob and I went down. I did the structural geology in the pits. Bob did the remodeling work, 3D modeling, and relogging of core. And we made some very specific drill recommendations. They were drilled by the company on our recommendations, and they made some major discoveries off of those. We figured out where the gold control structures were on the property, the whole bit. Where I'm going with this is that we have seen this in the past, where I remember walking into that pit at Newcastle, and the US-based geologist that I was talking to said, Chris, I don't know, because I'm a structural geologist, I don't know why they brought down a structural geologist. There's no structure in this pit. And the guy was talking to me in front of a 20-meter wide fault that is the main plumbing control for most of the gold mineralization at that deposit. And we figured out that that was a big fault. It was so big, everybody missed it before. And we figured out where its splays and subsidiaries were. And those ended up being remarkably well mineralized additions to that system. Here at the Dixie project, some of the drill holes historically were off by 50 meters, the collar locations.
Wow.
50 meters, 75 meters. The drill azimuths were off by up to 30 degrees that I've seen. Drill holes in the wrong place, drill core unassayed. Some of the stuff that we found, the best that I've seen is high-grade gold in the box, unrecorded and unassayed by one of the predecessors. I won't name them. But it was about a meter and a half of an ounce sitting there.
Wow. Unrecorded,
unassayed in the core. So because so many of the holes were slightly off or badly off in some cases and unassayed, the geo would look at the, if you're drilling, if you're drilling a 3-meter wide target, say it's normal Red Lake, it's a 3-meter wide target, it's going to be 10 grams or 15 grams, that's your ore, right? Now you're off by 50 meters in your drill core. I mean, you're out to lunch, right? Like that's a world away. And there's drill core where because the drill hole was in the wrong place or the azimuth was wrong, the place where they were supposed to hit the gold was also wrong. So the geologist, on probably a limited budget at the time or limited interest, I don't know what it would be, would look at the core, look at the target depth they were supposed to hit it on, and ignore the rest of the stuff. So there's gold popping out on other geologic contacts parallel to that main contact, and some areas in the drill core where they said, oh, the contact's just not here, it's just because the hole was in the wrong place, right? So we're finding a lot of that going on now as well. That's not really material to our news flow, but it sure as hell helps our modeling work. So the three-dimensional modeling work that we do all the time, every hole we do goes into a 3D model, and it builds a 3D volume, and it's something that's very useful when we talk to other people about the project. project. It's always updated and it's always an ongoing process. But there's a lot of stuff that was missed on here. So just like you're alluding to, it was quote unquote the wrong rock or the wrong intercept depth or the wrong hole, but we're finding a lot of gold in those contacts in this system as well. And it's one of the reasons, I guarantee you, if that work had been done properly the first time, it would not be Great Bear sitting here talking about this today, right? So
interesting. Well, can you resurvey those holes to bring them into a modern resource? Or are you going to have to do a lot more duplicate drilling to clean up the data?
We're doing a gyroscopic, it's a non-magnetic, it's a north-seeking gyro resurvey of a lot of that drilling right now, and it's very, very useful. The rock is highly magnetic, so if you go and you map on the surface, I've seen historical assessment reports on the project where the north arrow is off by 30 degrees. No, actually it was 90 degrees. One of the outcrop maps I saw, it was off by 90 degrees. And it's because it's magnetic as all heck, right? The stuff that we're looking at. So we're using a north-seeking gyroscopics tool to resurvey a lot of that drill core, including even our own original surveys, because we tried to use a magnetic tool. It's obviously the common practice, and we realized there's an issue with it. So we cleaned up the historic data and our data, and it really helps with the modeling. One of the side effects is it shows excellent continuity in our main zones. You know, like that main Dixie limb zone went from having sort of a patchwork and various gaps. When we figured out holes were off by 50 meters or 75 meters, we threw holes into the quote unquote unmineralized gaps, and that's where we got some of our best intercepts. Like our 10 meters of 16 gram first discovery was in an area that was supposed to be barren, right? Based on that.
That's really interesting. And yet another reason not to go with the historic resource, because it would be, you know, it would not only not characterize the overall deposit, it would be wrong, very wrong for the area that it did touch on. But let's one more question about grade and thickness, if you would. I noticed on the last, you know, very high grade result, 100 grams over 1.75 meters, but over 300 grams over half a meter. So it seems like, you know, if you have 300 grams in that half a meter, there's not a whole lot over the rest of the 1.75. And what are you doing there? Is that because the 1.75 is all quartz and therefore counts as the intercept, or how does that work?
The entire 10 meters, I believe it was all quartz veining. So there was, I think, 7 or 8 gram or 9 gram material on one side of it, 300 gram material on the other side, and probably gram to a few grams or several grams in between throughout the whole. There was some sub-gram stuff. I think we had a meter that was basically dead in it. We disclosed the entire width of what we hit there because we don't like to conceal. Like you're saying, even when we don't yet know the orientation of a zone, we'll put out a cross-section. Or even when we hit something new and exciting like this, we'll put out all the assay intervals for it. So that'd be its typical Red Lake high-grade veining. They're crack seal type veins. So you get, say, the highest grade pulse comes through initially, then the later pulses come in. So the first pulse comes through like this. It's very high grade. The next pulses, as they come through the middle, widen it further. And if they're lower grade, then the highest grade goes along the margins. Really, if you look at that, that's a 10-meter width, I believe, on that vein. And the hole was at 50 or 60 degrees, say 55, I believe, degrees dip. So a true thickness on that vein is likely on the area of about 6 meters or so, you know, in that range, 5 or 6 meters. That means I look at it from my background in what would a muck scoop take out of the ground? They're about 2 or 3 meters wide. Right, so you tend to give an interval off of what a mining width would be of 2 or 3 meters, and that's why we picked like it was a convenient assay interval of a couple meters of 100 grams. That would be like realistically, if you were in a mining context, you'd probably take the whole vein, because the vein distribution of gold will vary place to place within it. Like maybe 10 meters away, the high grade's actually at the middle of it. I couldn't tell you right now until more work is done. But realistically, if you're mining underground and you have grade several grams on one side and several hundred grams on another, you probably end up removing the whole volume of the vein. So it's open to interpretation, but we tend to provide intervals that are according to mining widths. Right?
Sure.
So
the only people I've seen mine a half a meter stope was the Fire Creek, the Klondikes. Those guys had some amazingly tight, long hole stopes, half meter wide, just amazing. But I've only seen that once. You just generally, so fair enough. 1.75 meters is a more machine mineable width. Fair enough. Okay, well, you've been a very good sport, me asking you some, pointed questions here. I have a much better picture now.
Thanks, Bert.
I can't say I'm going to run out and buy the stock tomorrow. I just, there's something about something that's gone vertical that I want to see it come back to earth a little bit. But no, I get that you have some serious size potential here. I understand, and my congratulations to my colleagues who got there before me. I will be watching this story, and I wish you the best of luck with it.
Thanks very much. And I wish more people would ask me the kind of questions you do. That is rare as hen's teeth. So I really enjoy having the opportunity to talk technically about the project as well. Thanks very much.
Very good. Good afternoon.